Welcome to another episode of OLR Connections from the Ohio Lode of Research. In this episode, we continue the conversation between Right Worshipful Brother Gardiner, the Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge of Montana, with our past master, Right Worshipful Brother Chad Kopenski. We pick up this episode in mid-conversation where they are discussing the context of the value of Masonic artifacts and then continue to the development of the Grand Lodge of Montana Museum. Brother Gardiner also shares with us his ongoing research ideas and interests. Unfortunately, the internet connection between the Appalachian compound between southeastern Ohio and Montana was a little spotty at times, so I apologize for some of the abrupt edits within this video.
So this will be the disheartening thing for a lot of people who learn about this, is that a lot of these places, they're like, yeah, that's cool to you, but it may not fit our purpose. And by the way, you might not be aware, we've already got 8 cornerstones sitting in the basement. You know, we've already participated in those. We've got like the newspapers they stuffed in there, the coins they stuffed in there, the handwritten oration stuffed in there. We've got a copy of the proceedings that were stuffed in there. You guys don't even know we have it. It's been sitting here. Ain't none of you guys come by and check it out, right? And then we go, oh, whoops. They go, anyway, if you'd like to know more about your own history, Mr. Freemason, we've got more of your stuff here if you're interested, but we're not really, politely speaking, interested in that particular rock at this particular time. And you're likely to get that actually in a lot of places. So this is where I say it matters. Well, that's what I'm saying. You have to make a judgment call. If you're saying this appears to be the first one from 1843, don't just go like, hey, this is valuable and it's important, and then just give it to an institution. You know, their first thought is, we have basically a mission that says, here's the scope of our collections. These are the things we're interested in collecting. These are the things that we have in our existing collections. Do we already have something like this? Is this valuable? Is this the kind of thing we have the place for? Do we have the time and resources to conserve? Do we want to be collecting in this area? And they're likely to say, it's cool, but just because it's old, it doesn't mean that this is something. They have to narrow. Otherwise, every old thing becomes something that everybody drops off. This is something common across all of the museum world. Someone says, oh, I have my aunt's very rare 1823 steam iron. You know, you pour some water in the thing, put it on your cast iron stove, it heats up or whatever. And they go, yeah, cool story, bro. But we've got like 28 of those, not, you know, that particular model, but we've got enough representational ones. We don't need more. However, there is a pioneer museum talking about the Ohio River Valley, you know, from native times all the way through colonialization and so on. It might more fit their scope of collections. Good luck. And you might not even get that. You know, sometimes they just say politely, no, thank you, and move on. Everybody's got to have a scope of collections.
I think it becomes really frustrating, I think, for a number of Masons. And it's funny, there was just a posting on the Freemasonry subreddit about this. Their town was founded by certain Freemasons, like there's names after them, and they have some of the, you know, this town founders, they have his sword, they have his apron, or they have, you know, the minutes from when he was initiated, pastor, raised. And they said, well, it seems like the local historical society, they're not interested, or, you know, nobody knows that George Washington was a Mason. Like, well, because nobody cares. Like,
dude, some guy said, important.
What I'm trying to say is, I think yes, it's cool to us, but it may not be cool to the outside world. So
probably not. And did they belong to 18 different organizations? Was he, you know, a philatelist? Did he belong to the Stamp Collectors Association? Was he into numismatics? You know, the guy was a coin collector. He belonged to the Ohio Coin Collecting Society, you know? And you start going down the list, and we go, yeah, but Freemasonry. And they go, yeah, but. And do you know that Freemasonry directly impacted like his choice for what he did as a mayor, or was it just one more club that he belonged to? And maybe he was active in the organization, but still doesn't necessarily mean anything to them. And beyond that, it goes back to, again, they have to have a scope of collections. Like if the story they're willing to tell is, you know, here's what we'd like to do, maybe that lodge's history with that particular town and that particular mayor sounds cool to us. Maybe the town doesn't want to be tied to that history, you know, and we like to, well, but, and they're like, yeah, cool. stop right there. We're good. We don't need to hear more. That could be the case as well. But the reality is, with every collecting institution, they have a scope. They say, I only have so many linear feet of room to put stuff. I only have so much budget to maintain and preserve stuff. I only have so much time to catalog everything. Many large institutions have a registrar. Their whole purpose is simply to catalog things as it comes in, and they have a huge backlog. And they have to decide, I get a box with 198 things. Am I just going to take a look and say, it looks like there's about 46 campaign buttons, 5 ribbons, and it looks like there's the remainder is a bunch of pamphlets, and that's it. That's what they list it as, because they don't have time to individually on an item level say it is, this pamphlet published in whatever. And again, then it becomes, how accessible is it? How useful is it to retain it? So every institution makes that judgment call, and you're going to have to make that too. If that is now personally in your possession versus like it's, owned by whatever, then don't give it to somebody who is basically going to stick it in a box in a dungeon that nobody's ever going to see. Take pictures.
So you mean those pins that are on the wall behind me? Those I shouldn't donate those to the fraternal
if you're in
collections?
Texas,
They don't
people
want...
would deem those important. People in Texas would deem those important. The Texas Masons would.
If I am looking through my lodge, if I'm in Ohio and I go to my lodge library and I see, a list of proceedings from 1803 to today, should I hold on to those? Are those worth holding on to? Should those just stay on the...
My first question
shelf,
is are they harming anybody by staying there? If no, then just leave them there. So a lot of Masons, they walk in and they go, ain't nobody reading this, including a lot of Grand Lodges, let's chuck them. And they put them in a dumpster and they get rid of them. And I start with, if it isn't harming anybody and none of you walk into the room ever and you don't care, then just leave them be. Some young Mason is going to walk in there at some point, and young being relative, anyone under 148, I guess, they're going to walk in there and they're going to see those and go, hey, this is something interesting. And they're going to read that kind of stuff. It's a lot easier if it's handy and it's available. So if it's not harming anybody, start with just leave it alone. That's an easy thing to do. That's how this stuff retains in the first place. That's how somehow that book you were holding in your hand stuck around, because someone else could have looked at it and said, oh, well, it doesn't have anybody's name on it. I need to get rid of it, because if it doesn't belong to anybody, what's the point? Why are we holding on to the dang thing? And that very well could have been the case. So my first advice is leave it alone. Do nothing.
But if I come across, almost every lodge I've gone into has 400 copies of, the 2-volume set of Mackey's History of Freemasonry and, 900 volumes of Morals and Dogma. Because was it Scottish Rite used to give those away to all new Masons?
Yeah, leave them alone. I mean, who cares? But give them to new Masons, right? Like if you got like all these extra copies, give them to a new dude. Maybe it'll excite his interest, or maybe he needs something to sleep with. He'll just but great. This is definitely a snooze fest.
See, maybe I'm the wrong person, because somebody just gave me a copy of Jeremy Cross's book, his True Chart, and like that's great. But I also have like 9 copies that I can get from the Library of Congress or Hatha Trust. Like, it's not important to me that I have the document, because I can get the information electronically.
You can right now. You don't know how long those websites are going to stay up. And it is important to have that electronically, but which edition? Like if there's 26 different editions, maybe there's a key change in one of the editions, then it's good to know, right? And that one might not be
and find out.
Well, I personally own multiple editions. That's why I asked, what edition do you got? But not at the moment. Let's hold off for a second. And I'm not trying to be cynical about it. I just mean like we start with what's valuable. So like for most people, a copy of Cross's Masonic chart, I think might be a little bit cooler than some of the 800 copies of Mackey's, because they can easily just borrow an 800 set. They've got piles of them around there, but they might not have readily available that particular edition. And you might know to go online and where to dig to find Jeremy Cross's True Masonic chart, but that doesn't mean that they do. It's one thing to just walk in and it's available. It's casually available. You walk in, it's sitting in front of you, but then that thing exists. But if you don't know it exists to go looking for it, that's something else entirely. So Leaving things freely available and unattended and unharmed is obviously a good starting point in my mind. But that's just one opinion. Take it or leave it.
There's the books that you expect to see, like everybody seems to have Born in Blood, and I don't know why. But then, yeah, um, there's books that every time I look in there, they're like, this book exists, and then I send a picture to you or Heather, and you're like, that didn't know that existed. I mean, it's weird the stuff that's out there. But I do want to talk about the museum because I think that has been kind of a passion thing for you. So, and since this is really for the Ohio Lodge of Research, also, by the way, I know that we helped bring you to the Midwest Conference, so thanks for letting us bring you there. We really
Thank you
appreciate
to the
that.
Ohio Lodge of Research. Yes.
And one of the things you did talk about was the museum. Like what, where, why, how? What was it, and what'd you do, and what is it now?
So our Grand Lodge building was constructed between 1935 and 1937, deliberately to have a museum. The cornerstone on the outside of the museum says Library-Museum, Grand Lodge AF&M of Montana. So they make it clear on the cornerstone, we're intending to be a library and museum in addition to the offices.
Okay.
And they collected early on and stopped around the 1960s, which would have been our 100-year anniversary and the general falling off of the interest of most people. And from that point on, we sporadically collected things. It was very rare. Mainly our collections grew from that point only when someone would randomly drop something off. Hey, my grandmother had something here. It's in a box. It looks Masonic. You open it up and it's a really cool old apron from Pennsylvania from 1812. Okay, sure, we'd like that. But very little was done for a long time. My predecessor had bought maybe, I'm not really stretching it when I say it, maybe 4 items in like 10 years, 12 years. You know, the budget was not there. It was thin on the ground. There just wasn't a lot of interest, and things kind of really changed a couple of years ago when I suggested we could do some things and floated a couple of ideas, and a few other people picked it up. And so I drew together an outline. I contacted a freelance designer, one of the only ones in Montana anyway, but a fantastic guy, a guy named Jeff Wyatt, who had done some work 35 years ago, stuff for the Missouri Historical Society, did a mount for like, I don't know, maybe Charlemagne's horse's armor in the Smithsonian or something.
Oh gosh.
So I contacted him and he helped me. It was great that I did because he became a project manager. So he could lay out all the stuff, you know, here's where the things will go. And the content was entirely up to me. The text, the items selected, etc. I gave him the vision for the arrangement I had, and then he would give his feedback. Well, the best way to conserve this item and display it would be like this. And with those kinds of feedbacks, then I say, all right, here's what I like to see for the arrangement. And so I took the existing room, determined how many divisions it would be. And our previous museum went like this. Old object, little placard, it is this. Oh, it is this. There's nothing being told. And nothing really to draw in a person. As a Mason out of Ohio would say, there's no meaningful connections. So,
You're
yeah,
funny.
who's that guy?
Somewhere Rob Brower is sitting here going, well, that's 2. So yeah,
that's
we'll work
2.
the 3rd one in.
Yep. Okay. So what I did was I started backwards. I, in my mind, took everything out of the museum. I just said, nothing's in there. What do I need in there to tell that story? Because otherwise you're stuck with what everyone else has, which is, I have all these items. It's a sunk cost fallacy. I have all these things. I need to put them back. Otherwise, why do we have them? Nobody's engaging with them and you're not telling the story. It's probably not helpful to the item or to the institution. So I decide, all right, instead of having like 48 objects in the case, maybe limit it to like 3 to 6 items in a case. And then what's that story going to be? And so essentially what I chose is I tell the story of Montana from the gold rush colonial era, 1860s, when the largely white Anglo community kind of starts to populate Montana, and not solely, and tell the story of Montana through fraternalism. That's the gist of it. But we on Native Americans and Masonry, the Jewish experience is Masonry through Montana, you name it. Like the Jewish one, we got a map of Jews being expelled all throughout Europe for 1,000 years. December of 1862, Ulysses S. Grant expelling Jews across 3 states, the Department of the Tennessee. A year and a half later, they discover gold. When I say discover, gold was already here, but they decide, let's go where the gold is, right? And in what is now Helena, they called Last Chance Gulch. So you go from the story we're allowing people to open their mind to is December of 1862, for example, Ulysses S. Grant is expelling all Jews, accusing them as a people, as a whole group, of siding with the Confederacy, smuggling, arms and material to the Confederacy. And it turns out it's actually his dad, and he doesn't want his dad to end up in prison, so it's got to be the Jews, right? And I say this loosely as I've got like a set of grandparents who are Jewish and so on. Connection, like a year and a half later, people flood this connection and this area here, and that's fresh in their minds, right? Is Emancipation Proclamation is due to take effect like a week and a half after this. Lincoln says, I'm going to rescind the order. Doesn't look good. Ulysses S. Grant later comes to regret the decision, spends the rest of his life regretting it and trying to make up for it. But regardless, that's the context of the Jewish experience coming to Montana, Masonic. And we have newspaper articles from the 1860s showing them having religious services in our lodge building in Helena, right? And we had 4 Jewish Grand Masters in our first 50 years. And we have a picture of that in New York and that sort of stuff. We have one of those classic engravings. I'll grab one here so you can see. Everybody's seen one of these.
They may not have, just so you know.
Okay, sure. Most people have. The building of King Solomon's Temple, if I can get that right, which is based on a wooden model by a guy named Schott out of Hamburg, Germany, or at least it still exists. The actual model still exists, which is based off of a palace in Spain. And then maps of that, circulate. They create this model that gets used in plays. It displays in London right around the same time as the Goose and Gridiron guys are all getting their stuff started and so on. So it enters Masonic consciousness and it's all over the place.
And then somebody makes a engraving of it in Boston, and Shearer and 8,000 other people published the exact same print for and then Morris starts selling those prints to help fund his trip to the Holy Land, right?
That's one of his grifts. So,
hey, we have people here from Kentucky who think Rob Morris is brilliant.
And many people with the Star as well. So, and that's great for them. With this is like, okay, for Masons, you're using things like cipher books that are called like King Solomon and his followers. King Solomon's a Jew, right? You have ciphers called the Kabbalah. So we use a lot of these Jewish names to in our cipher books. We use like the story of King Solomon's Temple. It seems like there might be a connection that people can draw between a potential acceptance of Jews in places like Montana when freshly they had been expelled through several states and lost all possessions, been evicted and so on, tolerance and understanding and religious services being held in our lodge room. So there's of this society intend observing their time-honored services, their benches or pews in the Masonic Lodge, paraphrasing, but something to that effect in like 1866, right? The entire museum sets up things like that. Most general people in Montana may not be aware we have something to contribute and did contribute to all of our society here in Montana. And that's the thing that's missing when somebody wants to say to the local city hall, hey, this dude was a town father and you should be interested because we have this, sword or whatever. Like, what's the story? What's the meaningful connection, as Chad Kopenski would say, right? There's 3 right there.
Rob Brower's happy.
That's kind of how this came about, right? And I encourage everybody to come. There's photos, you can request, I can send, and it's fantastic.
I thought you had a 360 walk around online somewhere.
I did send it to you, and it was in our private, the Montana Masons Facebook group. I just haven't uploaded it to Google yet.
Having been sort of like on the sidelines, I know how much work you put into this, and I did actually ask Heather when she came back after seeing what she thought, and she said she thought that it was, it's one of those destinations that should be on your list as a Mason. Go go to the House of the Temple, go to Detroit, go to, but at
And
some point get to the library there. So
yeah, definitely everyone should come up and see something like this. Nothing else, because you can see how to tell a narrative, which is important to people who are not Freemasons. So there's intentional design involved. The displays are made with accessibility in mind. So let's say you're in a wheelchair between this height and this height. This is realistically what you can view things. People with vision impairments, this is the lighting kind of stuff you might want. The distance between everything, there's enough room to get a wheelchair in there. We did things for the way it's it's rectangular, but I put there's two kind of retaining walls on the side, and you get funneled in with a curve, and it takes you to the right, and the immediate first thing you have to walk past is conspiracies and persecution. So it talks about the whole Baphomet Taxel thing. It talks about the Illuminati, the actual one as opposed to the internet hoax. It talks about
basically the really cool Dungeons and Dragons group that had a great name and that fell apart because somebody got greedy.
Sure. From there, everyone gets to kind of choose your own adventure, right? People, if they're tourists who want to come by and view, is on the far end. And that would be Meriwether Lewis's Masonic apron, is freestanding, or we have some things dealing with the Wild West kind of element, somewhat true, but also partly fictional. But we have a whole lot of it, which is true. So we put that cool stuff on the far end as well. So deliberately, it funnels you one direction. Have to walk past the conspiracy, hoaxes, persecution kind of stuff. The next thing you'll encounter is a thing on kind of what is Masonry. So there's museum design things. We belong to the American Alliance of Museums, the American Association of State and Local History. I belong to the Society of American Archivists. So you buy a bunch of the books, you read a bunch of the magazines, you take classes. I took classes from the AASLH and so on. And you find out, museum visitor studies, like the types of visitors, the people who like to see everything, the people who want to read everything, the people who feel better when they're in a group, the people who just like the experience. So you try and play to those kinds of things and play to your strengths. So in summation, I think it's pretty rad. I encourage everyone to come on out.
You say 80,000 things there that I want to touch on. One of the things that is interesting to me is, because every lodge that I've been into has the display case of cool stuff. But it sounds to me like what you did is you did tell a story. You gave the cool stuff context, which I think is always missing whenever I go into a lodge, or even if I go to a local town, museum. It's look, this is cool. Yeah, but okay, why is this cool? Why should I care that this is? Why should I care about this thing? What? Yeah, it's cool looking, but
why does your companion, you walk in there with your grandfather and he's like, yeah, what does this mean to me, right? You come in with your cousin from out of town and you're showing them, they're not a Mason. They're like, sure, 800 Yorkite pennies are cool, I guess, but unfortunately, what we think is cool is sometimes not really cool to our friends and family, or to which is why I give them the admonition. That interest you, skip the things that don't. And eventually people will see the stuff that they found interesting, and their takeaway will be, I like that. That was cool. And that's all I can hope for. They feel a little bit more informed, or they feel like they had a good experience, then great.
I'll ask two questions and we'll see what comes with. Is there something specific you are researching, working on now? Or is there something that when you go to the flea market, thrift store, Goodwill, what's the stuff that you look for? I look for pins, or I look for small weird doodaddy things, or I look for books. I don't know what interests you.
There's projects I've worked on over a number of years. I put down and I come back to. One of them I'd like to do. Return to one. I gave a talk in Utah several years ago about what were the before the web work was adopted, right? So 1802, web is officially, adopted 1805, 1806 by the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts and the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire. They both jointly decide. All the Grand Lodges in New England eventually started adopting it. But what were they doing before then? Tons of evidence of necessarily what they were doing, but we can tell you what they weren't doing. And we know because tell us this was new at this time. And so by basically retrograde analysis, you can tell like, okay, I'm going to backwards engineer this thing. So they say we weren't doing any of this. 8 different people say we weren't doing that. Okay, strike that. We weren't doing this, strike that. Oh, this was a brand new innovation. We know the very day it was introduced to all the lodges in New York City. Okay, so when you get done with that, you can come up with, okay, here's a rough analysis of what may have been done at the time. So that's something I gave a talk on. I also gave a version of that at Masonic Con. Brian and those guys out of Massachusetts several years ago I did. And so I'd like to return to that. As for what I go looking for, I don't actually trawl like antique shops and bookstores and that kind of stuff, because at this point, all that stuff is stuff that's commonly available for the most part. It doesn't do it for me. I hate to say it, and I'm not trying to sound jaded or puff myself up, but that's all the pissant stuff what I'm not looking for. I'm looking for the handwritten rare thing from like 1832 or something to that effect. So I go looking for the oddball things or the things that are the high ticket items that I can't afford. And then I save like 4 years, buy it, and then I'm, can't buy anything else for their 4 years. So
I interest you in a deck of trading cards from MasonicCon 2024.
That's kind of exciting.
Yeah, there's James Morgan in there.
Morgan wrote that fantastic book on the King Solomon Grand Lodge, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of William D. Matthews out of Kansas.
Oh, it's outstanding.
A seminal work, fantastic. It's the kind of thing that, like, again, if you want to throw at somebody's head for too much information, there you go.
Yeah, like at some point, I kind of want to put you, him, maybe Chris Ruley all in a room and just sort of say, so. I don't know, throw out something stupid and inane to see what happens. Like, so Rob Morris, saint or charlatan, and then just sit back with popcorn for 3 hours and watch what you guys do.
Sure. So that's the kind of stuff I do go hunt for, would be like to find somebody who might have original archival stuff of Rob Morris's original handwritten notes or sheets and so on. So like Iowa has these huge I'm drawing a blank of the term, but souvenir books that he gathered, a whole bunch of stuff that he'd done, and it's got notes from like a Masonic Congress in Chicago, and it talks about like the votes they had. Pike's name is mentioned. Here's the votes. Like he's doing his own tallies of like who voted for what or how many in favor. They agree to, like, I think that might even be the one where they changed, like they get rid of the skull and crossbones apron at one point again or something, or maybe they adopt something else in the uniform. I forget. But in any event, things like that, which are sometimes interesting. I managed to obtain a 2nd edition Jachin and Boaz, the exposure, from 1762.
Oh, really?
But Ken Wilkow in North Carolina contacts me like a week and a half ago, and he goes, "Hey, I just bought a 1st and 2nd edition of J&B." And I was like, "Cool, I've got a 2nd, published within, like a week or whatever, that 1st, 1762. And he's like, "Yeah, I just got one as well." And I was like, "Cool, where'd you get it from? Because I'm wondering if it's mine, because mine has been listed for the last 2 years, even though I own it. They're still listing it." And he goes, "Well, I'll let you know when I get it." And then he goes, "Turns out I only got the 1st edition. The 2nd one is listed as already sold." And I was like, "Yeah, because I beat you to it. But now you got the 1st edition, which I didn't know he was selling." But that's the kind of stuff that interests me. I got a reproduction of the Regius manuscript from like 100 years ago, the old charges, the scroll that rolls out exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a copy of one of the scrolls, the Scarborough manuscript, but the Regius in the red cover and that kind of stuff. As I like to point out to everybody who will, enjoy it, new and all, I've got one of the original arrest warrants for William Morgan. I got one of the 1736 list of lodges by Picart, which is the engraved with those sign boards, says Scots Mason Lodge, that kind of stuff. So those are the things that I go looking for. I'm not likely to encounter those at the other places. The pins and that kind of stuff no longer is interesting because I have to pick again, right? Like if you're going to collect, scope of collections, those things might be cool, but like that, I don't really need another monitor from 1892 unless I'm trying to complete a collection of every one of them that Montana maybe published or something, right?
Right.
That's kind of what I do.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. The pins, those are all stories. Like there's a story behind every single one of them. So that, sure. And I know it's meaningful to me. I probably could write them down, but I also know that when I die, someone's going to take that to a lodge and say, "Here, have fun," and some other guy is going to pick it up and enjoy them. And
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. Like,
Yep.
I don't know. That's uh, but I do like the weird small things, like finding little rituals or finding. I like things
Yeah.
that people carried. Like I really, that's the things that, you know, um, and books. I don't know.
Old aprons, I
I
will say. I really like the old hand painted or engraved aprons, that sort of thing. I find some enjoyment. Sometimes you can find those in antique shops and that sort of thing. I'm with you though. Like when you said that you wanted to make sure maybe your lodge or someone else gets those, I'm all aboard, all about, and all aboard with. Make sure that people get this stuff. If people just squirrel it away in their private collection, it's cool for you, but the rest of us don't get to benefit from it. And I have no right to it. It is cool, And so there's a whole lot of stuff that is squirreled away in private Masonic collections out there that none of us will ever see, which is
well,
unfortunate because what can you do about it?
well, and I also thinking that like if there's a Mason sitting here listening to this, and like I don't know, we all tend to
I
be
know both of
collectors
them
of
who
stuff.
will. Yeah,
Yeah, there. If you're like if you have stuff that you is this important keeping? Like I said, well, how would you feel if you saw it in Goodwill? Right? Do you, this thing right here. If this was in Goodwill, how would you feel about it? And for the average person, meh. But like Spencer Haman from Illinois made this for my daughter, so this was her gavel when she was, head of her Rainbow Girl chapter.
that's cool.
Yeah, sorry, assembly not chapter, what she just told me. Yeah, this is not going to Goodwill. Well, then that means I better make a plan for it and tell somebody about it. You know,
Sure.
if the pin's on the wall. If I die tomorrow, somebody call Ruby and say, "Hey, can I have those?" And that we're good. So
Yeah. Well, and bear in mind what we think is valuable, a lot of other folks may not, and sometimes even the things we might not value that other people do. I get people dropping off stuff all the time, probably not genuinely valuable, but I appreciate the intention behind it. I really do. Like to that person, they're like, this might mean something to someone. I don't want it to, just get destroyed or whatever.